Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Oren Bambrick. I'm a senior market advisor with Enterprise Ireland, working with the new exporter team based in New York. So our role here at the new exporter team is to help support Irish SMEs in beginning and continuing successful and sustainable export journeys. So you're very welcome to this session as part of our Get Export Ready webinar series, and it's great to see so many SMEs joining us. Beginning of the year, I think it's an ideal time to start thinking about your international growth and making the right decisions for the year ahead. So I'm joined today by Ruth Robinson from Full Circle, who will be leading this webinar. Ruth brings extensive experience working with export companies and has supported many of those businesses in refining their value proposition for international markets. So I'm sure you'll find her insights both practical and very relevant. So today's webinar focuses on crafting a compelling value proposition for international buyers. I think this is one of the most critical challenges companies face when entering the new market. So understanding what makes your offering strong, both at home and how or whether that resonates with international buyers is really essential to your export success. So starting from scratch in an international market, you can rely less on your reputation, maybe referrals or your network, which you might be used to in your domestic market. So you have to really lean on being able to communicate value clearly and concisely. So it's absolutely paramount that you understand what the value you bring to that international buyer is and meet them in the buyer expectation, knowing how they expect to be communicated with as well. So in my 12 years working abroad here in the States, both with and within Irish startups, I think this is the piece that I find can either slow momentum down for companies entering a new market, or if they can successfully grasp how to craft a great value prop, can really unlock a new market for them. So I'm really excited for Ruth to join us here today. Just a bit of housekeeping. We'll run for about an hour in total, around 45 minutes of content led by Ruth, and we'll follow that up with 15 minutes of Q&A. So you should be able to see the Q&A function and the panel on the top. So please use that to submit any questions during the webinar, and we'll pick those up at the end. And final piece as well, these slides and recording will be shared after the session as well. So keep an eye out for that. So if you feel you missed something or you want to cover something again, we'll be sharing both the recording and Ruth has graciously shared the slides as well. So that's all from me for now. So with that, I'll hand over to Ruth and look forward to speaking with you all again at the end of the webinar. Over to you, Ruth.
Great, thanks, Oren. Nice to be here and delighted to be talking to you today about crafting a compelling proposition for international buyers. Oren, just tell me that slide changed, okay?
All good, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about in the next 45 minutes or so is crafting a compelling proposition for your international buyers. So we're going to talk about the importance of a compelling value proposition. We're going to talk about the role of market and buyer intelligence in developing that. We're going to talk about developing buyer personas for international markets, and then how to actually develop your value proposition. So what's the structure of that and what do you need to include within your value proposition? And a really good place to start when you're thinking about this is just ask yourself this question. So why should a customer in an international market choose to buy your Irish product or service instead of a competitor product or service that may be local to them? And I would make the point that ultimately your success in any export market will depend on your ability to provide compelling answers to this question. So really, that's what we need to think about today. Why should they bother? Why should a customer in an international market think about buying what you produce rather than maybe something that they can get that's local to them? And in terms of the value proposition, then it's helping you to answer that question from that international buyer's perspective. They're saying, why should I choose you? And a good value proposition will explain who you're for. So who the customer is, the problem that you solve for that customer, the value that you add to that buyer or that customer, and why you're better than the other market alternatives that are out there. And as Oren said in the introduction, this is kind of doubly important in international markets because whilst in Ireland, you may get customers because people know you or they know your story or you're getting referrals. You know, I hear a lot of people say, I don't have to do any sales or don't really have to do any market. You know, the business comes to me. But those buyers in international markets, they won't know you, they won't know your story. They have plenty of choice in terms of who they buy from. You know, if they're considering you as an international seller to them, they've got the choice of all international sellers. And they're more likely to be risk averse when it comes to international suppliers, as you would be in Ireland if you were buying from a supplier who was off island. So without a compelling value proposition, you know, why would they bother to take the risk with a company like yours? So it's so important to get this right. And in terms of where should you start when you're thinking about developing your value proposition, the first thing I would think about is why do your Irish customers buy from you? And it, you know, beyond just because they know you or, you know, yeah, we're local and we get recommendations. Why is it specifically that your customers buy from you? You know, do you have a niche offering that nobody else can provide? Is there something exceptional in the quality of your offering? Is there some aspect of your service that really sets you apart? You know, what is it that is your real value proposition in Ireland? And if you're not sure, then you need to ask. So talk to your customers, survey them, and get good feedback on why it is that your Irish customers choose you in the first place, because that's going to give you some hints in terms of why your international customers are going to buy from you as well. And then secondly, then we're going to think about what do you know so far about your target export customers? Do you have a good sense of their customer needs and pain points? Have you done personas? Do you know the key differences maybe in those export customers that makes them different from your local customers? And then what do you know about your competitors or your alternatives within your target export market? And what might your competitive edge be in that market? So we're going to talk about the customers and competitors as the webinar goes on. And I would kind of recommend too that you check out the previous Get Exporting webinar from Thursday, the 15th of January. That goes into a lot more detail about actually conducting research and researching your market opportunities. So we're not going to go into massively into kind of market research in this in terms of target market environment, but these are the kind of 4 elements of market and buyer intelligence that you need to get a good handle on. So the first is the target market environment. And really what we're thinking about there are things like your pestle factors. So that's political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. What's happening in that market at that kind of big macroeconomic level that may have an effect on the opportunity for you there, how those buyers are currently feeling, what's happening, you know. So we know that the world feels quite turbulent at the moment, and those pestle environmental factors will be massively important depending on the market that you're currently targeting. But say I'm not going to massively go into that today because this isn't a market research webinar as such. But you also need to know then about the customer needs for your target customer. You need to know about the competitors that are there and the alternatives, and then buy-in behavior and constraints as well. And this intelligence is the foundation of a credible value proposition. It's going to help you to ensure that your messaging is relevant and credible in your target market. It's going to help ensure that your benefits align to actual buyer priorities, so you're not emphasizing things that don't matter to them. And it's going to help you make your differentiation clearer compared to those market alternatives. And the first aspect of this then is really understanding those customer needs. And a way to do that is through the development of customer personas. Now, you may well have done this for your Irish customers. In a lot of cases, I find that business to consumer type businesses tend to be more developed within the idea of personas. So there's a good chance you've done that already if you're a B2C business. If you operate in the B2B space, you may not have. But either way, you'll have your Irish persona, but you must do your international one as well. So it's that clear, a persona is a clear profile of your ideal customer or your ideal buyer based on market information and real data, such as demographics, customer pain points, and typical behavior. So you need to kind of do that research piece in order to inform the persona. And these personas will help you to understand your target customer better, think about what matters to them and motivates them, and then tailor more specific and meaningful sales messaging, which ultimately has a better chance of being successful. So on this screen, you can see it's two templates for customer personas. There are loads out there, and people have different preferences in terms of what these look like. So I've got a B2C customer persona there, and I've got a B2B customer persona. And I'm just going to take you through a couple of worked examples just to kind of bring these to life and the level of information. So the first one there is a business to consumer persona, and I've done it for an Irish gluten-free cake brand. Okay, so this is a made-up one, but it just gives you that sense. So I've given the person a name. She's called Jane Martin. She's 39. She's married with 2 kids, and she lives in the southeast of England. And the important thing is here, it's England that I'm targeting. So this company is targeting the UK, it's targeting England as a priority market. And so the persona reflects an ideal customer based in England. So communication, sorry, start with goals actually. The goals for Jane is that she's had a celiac diagnosis within the last 5 years. She really wants to enjoy tasty cakes without being sick. She wants to find cakes the whole family would eat, and she wants to find a gluten-free brand that she loves and can keep rebuying with confidence. So you're thinking there really, what's the goals of this customer in relation to a product like mine or a service like mine? The communication needs then, she needs clear and simple communication that the product is 100% gluten-free. She might like certifications from the Celiac Society, and she'd like some reassurance on taste. We've then got the frustrations and pain points for Jane. So gluten-free cakes are often dry, crumbly, or tasteless. They have confusing or unclear allergen labeling. There's a limited choice in cafes or other food service locations, and there's a fear of cross-contamination. She's influenced by ingredient quality and origin, reviews and testimonials, social media, food bloggers, and health bloggers. Her objections then are likely to be, will it taste as good as normal cake? Is it safe and genuinely gluten-free? Is it worth the premium price? Do the claims stack up? And all of that will then help the marketing messaging, which is going to focus on taste first. It's going to focus on trust and safety, and it's going to focus on quality and origin. So you're creating this persona of Jane, you're getting to know better what your typical customer is going to be like in that market, and that's going to influence the marketing messaging, and it's going to influence your sales messaging. Another example then in the B2B world. So in this, I've come up with a fictional ERP, so enterprise resource planning software provider, and they specialize in distribution companies. So in this one, this persona looks at who's the job role that they would be targeting. So in this, the guy's called Mark. He's an operations director, because this company will target operations directors, operations managers, etc. And they're in distribution. It's a mid-sized company, and maybe they've got 4 locations. We're going through the challenges for this customer. So maybe they have manual processes, they have inefficiencies in their system, they've limited accuracy in their information, and operations has become a bottleneck. The goals for him then will be to have accurate information, to improve overall operational efficiency, allow the business to grow smoothly, maintain service levels, reduce errors. He's influenced by the costs of the system, by proof that it'll work, implementation speed, level of disruption, and he'll be influenced by his team, operations and warehouse, CFO, finance, IT, and influenced also by kind of peer recommendations, trade views, and industry. He's likely to have objections in terms of budget, complexity, maybe they won't understand the business needs, the price, will the team use the system properly, etc. And then the marketing messaging is that it will emphasize distribution-specific marketing, emphasize the outcomes achievable, and show how implementation and adoption risks are mitigated. So that just gives you a sense of the level of information that can go into those personas, and it's really helping you to get to know that customer better, to understand what their goals are, what their objections are, what their pain points are, what they're influenced by, and therefore how to communicate with them. And that's effectively what we're trying to do through this process. So then on to your competitors then. And it's really important to think here about, so sometimes we hear, I don't have any competitors. And that's literally the worst words that a consultant that's helping you can hear, because there is an alternative. There's always an alternative to what you do, and particularly in international markets. And I think what sometimes we mean by that is there's not a direct competitor doing exactly what we're doing, but there will be alternatives for that customer. So who and what are you actually competing against in that target market? And the likely first alternative is that the customer may just do nothing. They don't offer this, they don't use this kind of product or service. So they're doing nothing. And so you're competing with them doing nothing. An example of that is sustainability software. I was speaking to recently, they're competing against that doing nothing because they sell their software into the hospitality industry, and they said that quite often clients are just not tracking energy usage, or they're not looking at that data. So that's what they're competing against. You might be competing against an alternative means to achieve a similar result, or a near competitor. And that's if there's another way of achieving the result, but it's maybe not the kind of exact. It's not the same. It's not the same as yours. Is not a fit for purpose solution. So that might be, for example, rather than that ERP system, you might be competing against a business that is using, they're using multiple spreadsheets. They're maybe using some MailChimp. They're maybe using an IT, maybe using Sage accounts, etc. So they're managing all of this, but they just haven't integrated it all. In the food, say the gluten-free products, say they were being sold into a cafe, the near alternative might be they might be doing something themselves and coming up with like a non-gluten alternative rather than buying in gluten-free alternatives. And then a direct competitor is literally somebody doing very, very similar to what you do, and you would consider them to be a direct competitor. And how you deal with these customers requires a different tactic because they present a different challenge. So if that customer is currently just doing nothing, or they're currently don't offer or don't do what you're doing, the challenge is to convince that customer that they need to do something and get over their inertia. So for the sustainability consultancy that I said, they would need to persuade those hoteliers that this is something they should be looking at because of the costs, or because of their potential to save money, etc. They need to persuade them to do something. If it's an alternative means to achieve a similar result or a near competitor, the challenge will be to convince your customer that the fit for purpose solution will make their lives or their business offering easier or better. So, instead of having their multiple spreadsheets and their different IT package and their use of MailChimp or whatever, in fact, a cohesive offering would be better. And if they're using a direct competitor product or service, then the challenge is to convince this customer that your solution is a better fit for them than their current provider. I'm going to talk about a machete edge in a minute. And issues such as the loyalty to their existing customer, how much effort there is to change, the price, etc., will all need to be considered. So what do we do better, faster, or differently than that direct competitor in the market? And a nice way to think about it, so if you are competing against a direct competitor in the market and you know that that's the case, then I like this little Venn diagram as a way to think about, right, what am I talking about here? What do I do that is different from my competitor? And a way to kind of verify that is to think about this Venn diagram. Okay, so you've got what your customers need, what your competitors offer, and what you offer. And by offer, I mean not just the products and services that you have, but maybe what it is about your company. What do you do really, really well? Okay. So in the very middle of that Venn diagram is things that your competitors offer, that you offer, and that your customers need. But that becomes a kind of a commodity item. So say there's products that you have, but your competitors have those products as well, and the customers need them, but they're pretty generic. All that happens is that becomes a commodity item, and the price starts to decline. And in an export market, if you have a commodity item, it's very difficult to get competitive advantage. unless you're of a scale where you really can compete massively on price, then generally you don't want to be in that commodity space in an international market. And then if you look at the bottom of the Venn diagram there, it's something that your competitors offer that your customer needs and you're not really offering it, or it's not something that you do particularly well. That is where your competitor has the edge over you. And it's good to know what that is. So maybe you have a competitor who's much, much bigger than you and they have that price advantage. Or maybe they have a greater range than you do, or maybe they have some really exceptional local service model that's going to give them an edge, and it's going to be very difficult for you to copy it. So what you're thinking about then is, okay, what does our company offer that our customer needs and that our competitors don't do well or are not doing at all? And that's where your competitive edge or where your machete edge is. And it's really important to define that properly for your international customers and in each market. And then you've got a whole load of non-value offerings. So you might have some things that you offer that your competitor maybe offer, but your customers don't need them. And sometimes people mistake a competitive edge or differentiator for something that is in fact a non-value offering. So whatever you do differently, whatever you do better, you must make sure that your customer in that market actually needs it, as opposed to it being a non-value offering. And then on the other bit, you've got areas of unmet customer needs. So what your customers needs that neither you nor your competitors are yet offering. And that's the kind of feature. So you're expanding your competitive edge and creating things that your customer needs, but nobody is offering yet. So that's the sort of the land of opportunity for you there as well. And when we're thinking about what we mean in terms of that machete edge, where could your differentiation come from? And ideally, this will be things that you do better than your competitors that really matter to your customers. So it's not in that non-value bit. And it's really difficult for others to copy. And the more of these things you have, it's like if you had a single band of a bracelet and you're competing on one thing, say you just compete on price. Somebody can come in, beat you on price, your advantage is gone, that bracelet is broken. But if you think of a kind of a woven kind of woven bracelet with lots of different straps, it's very hard to break that. So that's your differentiator, made up of lots of different strands. And those strands could be things like quality, branding, values and social purpose, experience and expertise, service, your business model, or your pricing. So you're going to have things that really set you apart, maybe under those titles, maybe under other things as well. But it's really important to kind of figure out what those are. So for example, maybe your business has tons of experience and expertise. So you've got loads of certifications, you've got loads of industry awards, you've got really amazing case studies that shows the experience and expertise of your business. That is something that's going to help you in terms of your differentiator. Maybe everybody will say things like, we have great quality and really good service, but those are like generic things to say, they're generic offerings. But do you do something totally different when it comes to service? So, for example, do you have massively personalized service? We have clients before, and they'll say, for example, it might be the mobile number of their, of the either the owner of the business or, the service representative or something. So you can get straight through to the help that you need, as compared to kind of offshore generic help desk or chatbot or something. Do you do something really special when it comes to service? Everybody will say good quality, but maybe you do something around the materials that you use, maybe the craftsmanship that's used, maybe the attention to detail. Maybe that's what's making you stand out. So really, really think about those differentiators within the market, not just, one or two kind of things that you do a bit differently, but what is it that's really creating your differentiation? Okay, so now that we've kind of thought about the customers, we've thought about what the competitors or the alternatives are, and you've got a good sense of those things, you're ready to think about your actual value proposition now. So some common mistakes when it comes to developing the actual value proposition are to assume it's just a slogan or a tagline. So sometimes we get a wee bit obsessed with kind of what we're writing maybe it's in the meta description on the website, or maybe it's just what you say, it's on your marketing material or whatever. That isn't a value proposition. That's a slogan or a tagline. The value proposition is a lot more than that. Maybe you have made the mistake of kind of listing dozens of features. So in our ERP software, that would be all the things it can do, all the features of it. But if you don't link the benefits of those, again, it's not a good value proposition. We hear the generic kind of stuff, the great value, the high quality, the good customer service. We hear that a lot, but customers just tune out. That's getting you, the fact that you have good service, high quality, and good customer service will only get you to the starting line of export success. It's not going to bring you down the track. Maybe another mistake is to keep it all about your story and forgetting what that actually means to the customer. So we know, within Ireland, quite often that brand story or that, the origin of your business or the localness of your business, the provenance of your business can be a really big thing. But what does that mean to the customer in the export market? Are they going to care about your story and your provenance? Not necessarily. So what is it that actually matters to them? You may also assume that customers know something about you or your business, and you don't make it explicit within your proposition, but your export customers will not know your reputation unless for some reason you've already been successful in that market. They won't know of you. So you need to be really explicit in terms of your proposition. And the final mistake would just be to cut and paste your Irish value proposition to all markets. And that's the wrong thing to do, because you must make it specific to the context that you're actually selling into. Because otherwise your international buyer is likely to say, well, that's fine in Ireland. But what does that mean in, the US or Europe or England or wherever it is that you're trying to sell to? Okay. So when it comes to the value proposition, and I like this model, there are lots of different models of value propositions. I like this model, which is the idea of a seesaw. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the seesaw is the promise, the differentiator, and the evidence. And on the other side of the seesaw is price, effort, and risk. So on the left-hand side, it's really the reasons to buy. So putting forward why somebody should buy from you. And on the other side of the seesaw, it's considering why they may not buy from you, or what's likely to be a factor that might tip that the other way. Okay, so really when you're thinking about the value proposition, you need to consider both sides of that seesaw. And sometimes what happens in value proposition is we only consider all these good reasons to buy, and we forget to get into the heads of that buyer in terms of reasons that they may not. So you've got the push and pull factors here. So a little bit more detail then on that. So on the left-hand side, when we say promise, that's really what's in it for the buyer. If I'm the buyer, what's in it for me? What is the promise of your product or your service? And that can include the features and benefits of your product or service. So a feature is what your product actually does or what your service does. And the benefit is why that matters to the buyer commercially or emotionally. So a benefit in terms of, will it save you money? Will it save you time? Will it make things easier for you? Will it make things more pleasant for you? What's the reason, or why does that matter? So promises around kind of features and benefits. And then the differentiator is, why is your offering better than the alternative? And like we talked about, you might be competing against nothing, you might be competing against a near competitor, or you might be competing against a direct competitor. But what is it that sets yours apart? And thinking about that machete edge if you do have a direct competitor. And then the evidence is, what is it in your proposal that would make me believe? So anybody can do a good sales pitch. Anybody can have great marketing information. But what is it about your proposal that actually makes me believe you? And that is so, so important, particularly in international markets, because in Ireland, somebody can probably check, they can probably phone somebody and see if your business is any good. Quite often, they've come to you through a recommendation. But in an international market, you haven't necessarily got that benefit. So Do you have, for example, really good metrics around the cost savings that you're proposing? Do you have case studies? And ideally, those case studies would be specific to the market that you're targeting. Do you have a client list of either similar companies to them that they can look up and say, okay, well, this has worked for them, chances are it'll work for me? Or do you work maybe with some well-known international brands? Those would be important in terms of reputation and in terms of evidence as well. So what is it about in your proposal that would make me believe? And then on the other side, we're thinking about the price. What does this cost? Where's the value for money? Where's the whole lifetime cost, etc.? Effort. What do I need to do to get the return? Or how much effort is it for me to buy from you? And what's the risks? What could go wrong if I appoint you? So we're going to consider both sides of the seesaw really, really carefully when we're putting together the value proposition. So just a worked example of this again then. So we'll come back to this Irish ERP system provider, okay? And the promise for these, so remember they specialize in the distribution sector. So the promise for a company like that might be, we help UK distribution companies to eliminate their manual processes, improve their productivity, and cut operational costs by centralizing and automating inventory, order management, and finance. So that's what the company does, what they're promising to do. What sets them apart then in terms of differentiator? They're wholly focused on distribution businesses, so the platform works specifically for that industry. They can implement their platform in 3 months compared to 6 months plus in competitors, and they offer local UK support desk 6 days a week. So those are 3 really strong differentiators that will set them apart from what's happening in the market. And then on an evidence, they've got case studies of a UK company they've helped, and they've said, they've reduced their costs by X amount in 12 months. So they've got a really strong case study. They've got details. They are happy to give details of UK customers so that the potential customer can talk to them about the system and actually see for themselves what it's like. And maybe they've got a work template to show how they do implementation in 3 months. So they've got some really strong pieces of evidence that, if you like, prove that promise and differentiator and help the buyer to think it's for them. Okay, but considering then the other side of the seesaw, we need to think about what that means in international markets. So we consider the price, the effort, and the risk side of the seesaw for our target export market. And what we're thinking about here is, how do you ensure that price doesn't become the issue? How do you reduce the effort in buying from you? And how do you reduce the perceived risk in buying from you? And just to make the point that a lot more time needs spent addressing this side of the value proposition when you're selling locally. So what we'd recommend you do is to identify the likely objections that come up around these areas and do come up with your responses. So what we find sometimes is we'll have customers, we've had this before, clients say going to an export market, they have a really strong meeting with a potential buyer. They've talked loads about the features, the benefits of what they do. They've really established those differentiators. They've talked them through some case studies, and the client is really, really keen. But the deal never really goes anywhere. And what's often happened is the buyer knows that this is a good business, this is a good opportunity, they should buy this, but something has happened that's made it too difficult. And I have a phrase I like to use called the too hard basket. And that's where the effort of doing business with you is just too difficult. I can't be bothered. So maybe, for example, you haven't figured out how you're going to get paid by that international customer. You haven't figured out how to receive payment in a different currency. That whole thing, you don't have the information there. So there's a bit of effort now required on the customer's part to actually do business with you, or they need to find out something about how what you do can work in their market. You haven't thought of it. So they can't answer the question. And again, it just starts to seem like too much effort. And on the risk side, that is, you might have a really, really strong offering, but they don't know you. And there may be somebody local to them that maybe doesn't just do it quite as well as you, but they're just down the road. And if there's a problem, they know they'll be able to phone them up and they'll be able to come out and help them. And so the risk is, oh, if I deal with you, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that you're going to actually be able to service me well. And so I'll just use the slightly less good one that's down the road. And that, it's a big phrase, nobody gets sacked for choosing IBM. That sort of statement came from the fact that those companies with really big reputations, there was no risk for somebody in a company choosing that big supplier because everybody knew them. There was no, you weren't going to be sacked for choosing them because they would be the market leader. Whereas if you're, say, a buyer in a small company in an international market, and you decide to take the risk with this unknown Irish company and something goes wrong, your job's at risk, your reputation's at risk. So that buyer is likely to be a lot more risk averse. So how do you reduce that perceived risk? How do you reduce that perceived effort? And how do you ensure that price doesn't become the issue? You may not be able to be as price competitive as you want to be in an international market because of the increased costs that you incur in operating in that market. So you need to make sure that price hasn't become the issue. So if we're thinking about this then for our ERP provider, when it comes to price then, they can focus on the savings obtainable through the system, through reducing waste, errors, and increased productivity. They could maybe give worked examples of that. So yes, their product is going to be expensive, but they can give worked examples of the savings that are possible. So thinking about the whole lifetime cost, thinking about the value that this system will actually give your company in the longer term. And they may also have kind of transparent pricing, so there's no hidden surprises. That might be something they'll actually emphasize. Thinking about then the effort, there's always effort needed to install an ERP system, but how do they reduce that perceived effort on the customer's part? And that might be to show how they can do this in 3 months, the on-the-ground support that will be provided to make it as seamless as possible, really linking to the benefits as well. And using case studies and references. And then in terms of the risk, using UK case studies like we talked about of similar businesses to show, look, you're not taking a risk. Here are some businesses that we've worked for before. A local phone number, UK local phone number, can help just with that perception of risk, that if you feel a bit more local, as opposed to giving your +353 number, which might make them feel that there's more risk. Maybe you can offer, maybe this company can offer a short initial contract period, or phased implementation is needed. So just things to do that help reduce the risk from the buyer perspective. So by the end of that then, you really should have a very strong value proposition. So on the one hand, you've set up that promise, so your features and benefits, what's in it for the customer. You've really established your differentiator. Why is your offering better to the alternative, whether that is the doing nothing, the near competitor, or the direct competitor? And you've got the evidence, what your proposal contains that makes me believe. You've got really, really strong evidence for that. And then on the other side, how are you dealing with questions around price, around effort, and around risk? And by the end of that, if you think about all of those elements, you will have a really strong value proposition for your international buyers. So just to sum up then, to finish, a compelling value proposition is essential to provide your international buyers with good reasons to choose your product or service instead of a local alternative. In order to do that, then the first step is to understand who your target customer is. So develop your business to business or your business to consumer profiles in your target market. One thing to point out as well, if you have a product that will be sold into, is ultimately destined for the consumer, but you're maybe selling it into retail or into food service, you need to have both business to business and business to consumer personas. You've got to think about the buyer at the end point, so the buyer who's picking that up in the supermarket or who's picking it up in the cafe, but you've got to also think about your B2B persona for your supermarket or your cafe owner or your distributor or whoever that is. So whoever the buyer is. Then understand your competitors in that market or the alternatives in that market and what can or do you do better or better and differently to those competitors in that market. And you've got to really do your research to find out what the competitors are offering. And then based on all of that information, carefully consider your value proposition and remember both sides of that seesaw. So a really compelling promise, a differentiator and evidence, and careful consideration of how you deal with the price, effort, and risk involved for your buyer. So that's us. Thank you very much. And I think now there might be some questions. Over to you, Oren.
Yeah, super. Thanks so much, Ruth. That was really, really great, and a really great deep dive into the rationale around like I said, competition. What the value you're bringing, and crucially the evidence that you need to support it when you're new to market as well. So, I see some questions coming through, but I would urge everyone to Ruth, you can stop sharing your screen if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I would urge everyone to ask questions in the Q&A section there if you like. I have a few coming through, but if you do have any questions while we have Ruth, great time to take advantage of that as well. So one of the early questions is, so what are some of the early warning signs that a value proposition is not resonating? So really good question for you, Ruth. And I think also a follow-up from myself would be, what's a good way to also test, sometimes we assume what the pain is for markets as well. So what's a good way to understand that maybe it's not resonating, and how do we perhaps test that assumption, whether it's with buyers in the market or however you may think.
Yeah. So one of the things I think we didn't really talk about market research, but one of the best ways of kind of researching in the market is to get in front of potential customers or buyers in that target market. And that might be at a trade show, it might be a networking event, somewhere where those buyers are in a kind of a low risk environment. And I think through those conversations, it's really good to kind of start the conversation and say, we found that customers have these particular needs or have these particular problems. Do you find that here? So get them to talk about, just your testing. So you're not saying, we know customers in, say it's, I don't know, Belgium. We know customers in Belgium have this problem. And then they say, no, we don't. Or, there's a blank face. So don't assume that it's definitely that, but start to ask, are these the kind of problems that you face? I think an early warning sign that it's not resonating is either in a meeting, you're just not getting those reactions. You're not getting the kind of positive, the positive symbols that it is resonating, or maybe you're just simply not. Maybe you're going big on marketing and sales efforts, and you're just not getting that return. So maybe it's not leading to meetings. Maybe the prospecting is getting you nowhere. I think all of those are signs that it isn't quite right, and the best way to kind of overcome that is get talking to more customers. And if you're saying, we initially thought that the need from our customers was X, we think we might be slightly off the mark. What's your experience? And people love to be asked for their opinion and advice. So I think that's a good way to kind of, in a low risk way, to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, really vital to test your assumption, and you mentioned it there, and you also mentioned in the deck is that just assuming that the pain is the same on both sides of the ocean, whether you're going to the UK, whether you're going to Europe, whether you're going to the States, or wherever you might be going, assuming that your software or your product or your service solves the same issue. Sometimes you'll see that maybe you have a different value proposition in Ireland than you may do in the States or in the UK. You may even be selling to a slightly different buyer in terms of the position in the organization. Again, maybe the same software, the same service, but where you're talking to a director of marketing in Ireland, maybe you're talking to a head of media or something like that in the States, for example. So good to really test those assumptions with both the value prop, like you said Ruth. I have another question here around the evidence piece as well. So really enjoyed the seesaw analogy, and definitely I see that hold up very true in our market in the States, is that use cases, evidence, and metrics, right, are really, really important. So if you say, this is the value we bring, you have to be able to back that up with with evidence is really crucial. So I guess just around the question on the evidence pieces is like how vital is that to have that as in the market, right? So a lot of our customers, or excuse me, a lot of our companies here that are tuning in would maybe only have domestic clients. So I guess like how do you start to adapt that for international markets when we want to talk about use cases where AIB
Mm.
may not mean much in
Yes.
the States, but it's a huge logo in
Yeah.
Ireland. So it's maybe how do you
So
overcome that barrier?
yeah. If you don't have any case studies from your target market, then you've got to use the ones that you have, but try to give those as much of an international flavor as possible. So don't say it was like the AIB Bank in Dundalk. Like don't go like super local on what you're talking about. So try to create that it's a leading Irish bank, and then explain it again, give it that more kind of international flavor. Talk about the problems that it has that are likely to resonate with, yeah, say you're selling to a bank somewhere else. Try and kind of place it more internationally. So just don't get lost in the kind of the local details. But case studies, if they're done correctly, are useful regardless, provided the problem is something similar. So say it's software, what you're doing, the savings that they're able to make, how you're able to do that implementation so quickly, whatever it is, all of those things should resonate. So even if you don't have case studies that are for the market, definitely have case studies or examples or proved metrics or whatever. The evidence is essential regardless of where you've done it so far. And the hardest one is obviously your first customer in an international market. To win them is potentially the hardest bit, because then once you've got one, you've got a case study. But if you don't have that, then yeah, just try and give it that more international flavor and really focus on how you've solved their problems, as opposed to it was Jimmy and the AIB and Dundalk. Give it that more international flavor.
Yeah, excellent. Absolutely. That's super. And I do agree. Having come over to the States over a decade ago with one of our businesses, it was really that first building that trust with that first client. And then once we had that local reference, the getting in the door is much easier, and things started to become much more effective. But like I said, you have to point to some evidence, and you have to start
Mm.
somewhere. So great point. I have another question here. Um, just on the conciseness of a value proposition as well, right? So and just to sort of frame it as well with some of the experience that I see, I often see not just Irish startups, but a lot of SMEs and younger companies. They send an outbound email, or they send a message, or they have an initial meeting, and it's a manifesto, right? It's very, very long. It's all the things we offer. Here's all the things we do, all our service. Here's all the people we do for. Here's an attachment. Here's a link, etc., etc. And they're really pushing the emphasis on the potential customer to go find the value, to go dig it out there,
Mhm.
right? And where what we often see in international markets, like you said, is there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of options for those buyers. So the clarity and conciseness of being able to say, here's what we do, like you said, that seesaw, here's our differentiator, here's our value, here's our evidence, really
Mhm.
concisely. So there's just a question here is, how long should a value proposition be? How are you refining it? How important is the concise nature of a value prop when
Mhm.
you're reaching out to someone for the
Mhm.
first time?
So I think there's a slight difference if we're thinking about value proposition versus the pitch. So the value proposition to me is everything it really what showcases what you do, why somebody should buy from you, and it's thinking about both sides of that seesaw. So the reasons to buy and the reasons not to buy, and that's all going to come out in a sales meeting, or as you advance a sale, you're going to cover all of those areas. But what you wouldn't do in a first contact with a client is lay out everything, because they won't read it, first of all, and they're going to think what. So you need to have I suppose your very short pitch that's going into email, or your equivalent, your kind of 30-second elevator pitch, or your one or two lines. So you're going to have that, which is going to be a lot more sharp and concise. So something you can easily put in an email, or something you can easily say to somebody if you meet them at a networking event or trade show or whatever. And then maybe from that, you've got your more, your couple of minutes pitch that will cover off more of that value proposition. And then you've got your bigger pitch deck, or your bigger presentation, or where you're in a meeting and you're able to talk through everything. So don't, you've got to have those different You've got to have different pitches for different purposes. So I think the value proposition is the whole thing, but you're going to narrow that, you're going to distill that right down for an intro email or conversation. But you've got to have your longer versions for the bigger pitch or the longer sales meeting, etc.
Yeah, excellent. I think it's a great point. And I think you can see that, like I said, whether it's a one or two sentences all the way through the pitch deck, I think it sort of permeates right through that. The value should, sort of stay pretty consistent, and you're tying that back to. And sometimes it's hard. The hardest piece is getting it into the one, two sentences, right? You have so much you want to share, you have so much you want to talk about, but to your point, maybe you have multiple value propositions for different buyer personas as well, as we talked, as you rightly pointed out, different personas. So maybe you sell to, if you're an ERP company, you sell to the director of operations, but maybe there's also a fringe benefit to another role in the organization. Maybe you want to highlight a slightly different metric or a different sort of value you bring to them as well. So it's a really good point on having the 1 minute version or the 30-second version, the couple of minute version, the longer deck. And another piece on that, when we often see, again, maybe companies that are pitching for the first time in a new market, in those meetings, they're maybe not asking the right questions as well. So I think a key part of this, like I said, the seesaw, before you launch into maybe a monologue for 15 minutes in a first meeting, and again, sort of giving all the information, just having 2 or 3 qualifying questions, trying to understand their pain a little bit better, sometimes can help navigate you through what you want to highlight as well. So thanks for that, Ruth. Just again, a little gentle nudge if anyone has any other questions. I think we're coming towards the end of the questions here. So feel free to jump in while we have Ruth. As I said, the recording will be shared, as will the slide deck as well. So feel free to pop in any other questions you have here. I'll give another minute for that. But yeah, Ruth, is there anything else you want to emphasize, I suppose, while we have you, while we wait for any final questions? Any one thing you want to leave us with?
Yeah, look, I suppose I think sometimes we get to the point where we think, well, look, I haven't got time to be doing months and months of market research, and I don't know how I'm going to find out, exactly what every competitor is doing and exactly what every customer needs. And so people can kind of feel a bit unempowered, I suppose. What I would just encourage you to do is, look, none of that, finding out what your customer needs are isn't rocket science. It is a case of talking to people. So I would encourage people to get out and talk to potential buyers, either in the market, via email, via LinkedIn, at events that EI run, getting the opportunities just to start to make those connections, start to talk to people, and see what you're maybe assuming about the market that may or may not be true. So, start to do that research immediately. It doesn't have to become a 6-month research project that means you can't do the day job. Get going with it, and try stuff out. So the question earlier, how do you know if it's not resonating? Start to have those conversations, start to try it out and see the kind of feedback that you're getting. I would be really, I've never actually worked with a business who on day one have come up with exactly the correct thing for each market. You do have to iterate that based on your experience. And anytime we've brought businesses to an export market to meet with customers, they always come away from it going, oh, I thought it was going to be this, but in fact, for this market, that's actually the product that they're really interested in. Or actually, I had this business model in mind for this market, but it turns out they like to pay this way. And that's the sort of stuff that really helps you then to develop. So it's much easier once you've had 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 conversations. The first couple are always going to be difficult. So I would probably just emphasize that need to iterate and get better as you go. Don't try and get it perfect on day one and have all the pitch decks done and it all looking stunning and then find out the message is wrong. Learn as you go and improve as you go.
It's a great point. I think these value propositions are organic pieces of information, right? They're never static. They always improve. They always tweak, and it doesn't matter if you're in year 1 of your export journey or if you're scaling, if hundreds of people, your value prop's always going to sort of adapt to the market expectations, the market needs as well. And I think to your point, Ruth, I think don't get overcome by paralysis by analysis. Get out there, start having those conversations. Sometimes as you maybe go through your value prop, you might see that little like sort of raised eyebrow moment from a buyer, that like aha moment I like to call it, right? Where like, oh, okay, they're really interested in that benefit of our software or of our offering as well, and you don't get that feedback loop unless you're out there talking to people as well. So I think it's a great point. Don't put this off, and I don't think it's a nice to have. I think it's an absolute need to have. It's imperative to get how you talk about your business correct, whether that's a one-liner at a networking event and be able to sort of give that elevator pitch to, again, what your actual sales meetings look like, what your collateral looks like as well. And again, resonating that all the way through to your website and to your LinkedIn and to every digital shop front you have as well, physical or digital as well. So, listen, I think we're just about at time. Ruth, thank you again for a really, really
Oh,
thorough and enjoyable walkthrough on crafting a compelling proposition for international buyers. Thanks to all the businesses and founders that joined us here today as well. Really appreciate it. As I said, we will be following up with an email shortly that will have the pitch deck, and a recording will follow soon after as well. And again, thanks again for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to us on the New Exporter team as well. We're always happy to hear from y'all with feedback or any questions you may have to follow up as well. But for now, thanks again to Ruth.
thank
Thanks again
you.
to the team. Thanks everyone for joining us.
See ya. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thanks, folks. Bye bye.